When bullies think they found the perfect victim, they never expect her mother to be someone who can kill with her bare hands. Sarah Martinez thought her military days were behind her, but some battles follow you home, and this time, it was personal. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside High School as 16-year-old Emma Martinez walked through the front gates, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her head held high despite the knot forming in her stomach. She had learned to put on a brave face, a skill inherited from her mother, though Emma didn't yet understand the full extent of what that meant. Emma was different from most of her classmates, though not in ways that should have mattered. She was intelligent, kind, and had a quiet confidence that came from being raised by a single mother who valued strength of character over everything else. Her mother, Sarah Martinez, had always taught her to stand up for herself and others, to be respectful but never to be a doormat. What Emma didn't know was that these lessons came from someone who had faced real danger in places most people couldn't imagine. The trouble had started 3 weeks earlier, just after the beginning of the school year. It began with Jake Morrison, a senior who seemed to take pleasure in making others feel small. Jake was tall, athletic, and came from a wealthy family that had donated generously to the school. He had a group of followers who hung on his every word and laughed at his cruel jokes. To them, Emma represented everything they felt superior to. She was quiet, she didn't wear expensive clothes, and she didn't seek attention or try to fit in with the popular crowd. The first incident happened in the hallway between classes. Emma was at her locker organizing her books for the next period, when Jake appeared beside her with his usual smirk. "Hey, scholarship girl?" he said loud enough for others to hear. "Nice backpack. Did you get it from the thrift store?" His friends laughed, and Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she said nothing and closed her locker, walking away with as much dignity as she could muster. Sarah had always told her that some people tried to make themselves feel bigger by making others feel smaller, and that the best response was often no response at all, but Jake Morrison wasn't satisfied with being ignored. The harassment escalated gradually. It started with name-calling and mocking comments about Emma's clothes, her lunch, her grades, and anything else they could find fault with. Jake and his friends would make loud comments when she walked by, imitating the way she walked or talked, and spreading rumors about her family. They called her Navy brat because someone had mentioned her mother was a veteran, though they had no idea what that really meant. Emma tried to handle it the way her mother had taught her, with dignity and by not giving them the reaction they wanted. She focused on her studies, spent time with the few genuine friends she had made, and tried not to let the bullying affect her self-worth. But teenage bullies can be relentless when they sense weakness, and they mistook Emma's restraint for fear. The situation took a darker turn when Jake discovered that Emma's mother was often away for work. Sarah had transitioned from military service to private security consulting, which sometimes required travel. She trusted Emma to be responsible and had taught her basic safety measures, but she couldn't be there every moment. Jake began to see this as an opportunity. One afternoon, as Emma walked home from school along the quiet tree-lined street where they lived, she noticed Jake's car following slowly behind her. Her mother had taught her to be aware of her surroundings, so she noticed immediately when the car started trailing her at walking speed. Emma's heart began to race, but she kept walking steadily, not looking back, hoping they would get bored and drive away. Instead, the car pulled up beside her. Jake rolled down his window and leaned out with that same cruel smile. "Where are you going, Navy brat? Home to your empty house?" The comment hit Emma like a cold wave. How did he know her mother wasn't home? Had he been watching her? The thought made her stomach turn. "Leave me alone, Jake," Emma said firmly, still walking without looking directly at the car. "Or what?" Jake laughed. "You'll call Mummy?" "Oh wait, she's not around, is she?" His friends in the car laughed along, emboldened by their leader's cruelty. Emma quickened her pace, but the car kept following. She could feel panic starting to rise in her chest, but she forced herself to think clearly. Her mother had taught her that panic was the enemy of good decision-making. She was still several blocks from home, and there were other people around. Joggers, dog walkers, neighbors in their yards. She wasn't in immediate physical danger, but the psychological impact was devastating. When Emma finally reached her house, the car drove away, but not before Jake called out, "See you tomorrow, Navy brat. We know where you live now." That night, Emma sat in her room trying to do homework, but she couldn't concentrate. Every sound outside made her jump. Every car that drove by made her peek through the curtains. She considered calling her mother, who was in Chicago on a 3-day consulting job, but she didn't want to worry her or seem like she couldn't handle her own problems. Sarah had raised Emma to be independent and strong, and Emma was proud of living up to those expectations. Her mother often told stories about the importance of handling challenges with courage and intelligence, though she rarely spoke about the specifics of her own experiences. Emma knew her mother had served overseas, but Sarah had always been vague about exactly what she had done in the military. The next day at school was worse. Jake and his friends seemed to have decided that following Emma home had been successful, so they escalated their campaign. They started showing up wherever Emma was, in the hallway, in the cafeteria, even waiting outside her classrooms. They would make threatening gestures, whisper cruel comments as they passed, and generally create an atmosphere of constant intimidation. Emma's grades began to suffer as she found it harder to concentrate. She stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, instead finding quiet corners where she hoped they wouldn't find her. She even skipped some classes to avoid walking through certain hallways where she knew they would be waiting. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. Emma was in the library working on a history project when Jake and two of his friends cornered her at a table in the back corner. Far from where the librarian could see, they sat down around her, trapping her in the chair. "Working hard, scholarship girl," Jake whispered, his voice taking on a menacing tone that Emma had never heard before. "You know, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about your empty house, about how nobody would know if something happened to you. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was something darker." The way Jake was looking at her, the way his friends were positioned to block her from leaving, the calculated nature of choosing this isolated spot in the library. This felt dangerous in a way that made every instinct her mother had taught her start screaming. "I have to go," Emma said quietly, trying to stand up. "Sit down," Jake said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "We're not done talking." Emma looked around desperately. The library was nearly empty, and the librarian was helping other students at the front desk. She was trapped, and she could see in Jake's eyes that he knew it. "My mum will be looking for me," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake laughed softly. "No, she won't. She's not even in town, remember? We've been watching. We know her schedule better than you think." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. They had been watching her house. They knew when her mother was away. This wasn't random bullying. This was planned, calculated harassment that had crossed into something much more serious. "What do you want?" Emma whispered. "We want you to understand something," Jake said, leaning closer. "You don't belong here. This school, this neighborhood, this whole world, it's not for people like you. And if you don't figure that out on your own, we're going to help you understand." One of his friends, a boy named Marcus, who had always seemed like a follower, spoke up. "Jake, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Jake snapped without taking his eyes off Emma. "She needs to learn her place." Emma realized in that moment that this had gone far beyond typical high school bullying. There was something genuinely threatening about Jake Morrison, something that made her think of the safety lessons her mother had taught her about recognizing real danger. Her mother had always said that there were people in the world who enjoyed having power over others, and that such people could be truly dangerous when they thought they could act without consequences. "I want to leave now," Emma said, standing up despite Jake's earlier command to sit. For a moment the three boys just stared at her, and Emma wondered what they would do if she simply walked away. Then Jake smiled again, but it wasn't the cruel smile from before. It was something colder and more calculating. "Go ahead," he said. "Leave. But remember what we talked about. Remember that we know where you live, we know when you're alone, and we know that nobody's coming to help you." Emma walked away on unsteady legs, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the library must be able to hear it. She made it to the bathroom before she started shaking uncontrollably. For the first time since the bullying started, she felt truly afraid. Not just embarrassed or frustrated, but genuinely scared for her safety. That night, Emma finally called her mother. "Mum?" Emma's voice was small when Sarah answered the phone. "Hey, sweetheart. How was school?" Sarah's voice was warm and familiar, and Emma almost started crying just from hearing it. "It was okay. When are you coming home?" "Tomorrow evening, just like we planned." "Is everything all right? You sound upset." Emma wanted to tell her everything. About Jake, about the threats, about how scared she was. But somehow, the words wouldn't come. Her mother was working, she was hundreds of miles away, and Emma didn't want to seem weak or needy. "I'm fine, Mom. Just miss you." "I miss you too, baby. Just one more day and I'll be home." "Are you remembering to lock all the doors?" "Yes, Mom. And you have Mrs. Peterson's number if you need anything." "Yes, Mom." "Okay. I love you, Emma. Get some sleep." "I love you too." After hanging up, Emma sat in her room feeling more alone than ever. She had always prided herself on being independent, on being the kind of daughter her mother could be proud of. Sarah Martinez had raised her to be strong, to handle problems with intelligence and courage. But this felt like something beyond what a 16-year-old should have to handle alone. What Emma didn't know was that her mother had sensed something in her voice, something that triggered instincts honed by years of training and experience in situations where reading people correctly could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah had learned to trust those instincts, and something about Emma's call had set off alarm bells in her head. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a veteran. She was a former Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the grueling training program and serve in combat operations. She had spent years in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, protecting others and completing missions that most people couldn't imagine. She had retired from active duty when Emma was born, wanting to give her daughter a stable home life, but the skills and instincts of a SEAL never really leave. After talking to Emma, Sarah sat in her hotel room staring at her phone. Her daughter had said everything was fine, but Sarah had heard the fear in her voice, the carefully controlled tone that suggested Emma was working hard not to reveal something. It was the kind of voice Sarah had heard from people in dangerous situations who were trying not to panic. Sarah made a decision. She called her client and explained that a family emergency required her to return home immediately. She caught a red-eye flight that left Chicago at midnight and would have her back home by dawn. Meanwhile, Emma lay in bed listening to every sound outside her window. Every car that drove by, every rustle of leaves in the wind, every creak of the house settling made her wonder if Jake and his friends were out there, watching, waiting. She had always felt safe in her home, but now it felt vulnerable and exposed. The threats from earlier replayed in her mind. We know where you live. We know when you're alone. We know that nobody's coming to help you. The words felt like a dark promise. And Emma realized that she was truly afraid of what might happen next. She thought about her mother flying home from Chicago, unaware that her daughter was lying awake in fear. Sarah had always been Emma's hero, strong, confident, capable of handling any situation. But even heroes can't fight battles they don't know are happening. As the night wore on, Emma finally fell into an uneasy sleep, unaware that her mother was already on her way home, and that the skills that had made Sarah Martinez one of the military's elite were about to be put to use in a way she had never expected. The war was coming home, and this time it was personal. Sarah Martinez arrived home at 6 in the morning, her mind still racing from the red-eye flight and the growing certainty that something was seriously wrong. She had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and everything about Emma's phone call the night before had triggered her protective instincts in ways that her daughter couldn't possibly understand. Sarah quietly let herself into the house, moving with the silent precision that had once been necessary for survival in hostile territory. She found Emma asleep in her bed, but even in sleep, her daughter's face showed signs of stress. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were clenched into fists even while she dreamed. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying her daughter with the same careful attention she had once used to assess potential threats in war zones. Something had happened while she was away, something that had frightened Emma enough to change her sleep patterns and stress levels. The question was what, and how serious the threat really was. She decided to let Emma sleep and use the time to do some reconnaissance. Sarah had always made it a point to know her daughter's world, her teachers, her friends, the families in their neighborhood. But now she realized she might need to dig deeper. Sarah made coffee and sat down at her laptop, her mind shifting into the analytical mode that had served her well during intelligence operations. She started by checking Emma's social media accounts, something she normally respected her daughter's privacy about, but extraordinary circumstances called for extraordinary measures. What she found made her blood run cold. There were screenshots of threatening messages sent to Emma through various platforms, comments on her posts that were clearly designed to intimidate and humiliate, references to her being alone, to her mother being away, to knowing where she lived. The messages weren't just typical teenage cruelty. They showed a level of calculation and escalation that Sarah recognized as genuinely dangerous. The messages were primarily from 3 accounts: Jake Morrison, Marcus Chen, and Tyler Brooks. Sarah memorized the names and began building what she mentally referred to as a target profile. Years of military training had taught her that understanding your enemy was the first step in neutralizing a threat. She cross-referenced the names with the school directory and social media accounts, building a picture of who she was dealing with. Jake Morrison appeared to be the ringleader, 17 years old, from a wealthy family, with a pattern of posts that suggested entitlement and a lack of empathy. Marcus and Tyler seemed to be followers, but that didn't make them less dangerous. What concerned Sarah most was the escalation pattern she could see in the messages. They had started with simple name-calling and had progressed to threats about knowing Emma's schedule and location. In Sarah's experience, people who made such threats were often working up the courage to act on them. Emma woke up around 8 and found her mother in the kitchen, looking perfectly normal except for the intensity in her eyes that Emma had learned to recognize as her mother's serious mode.
"You're home early." Emma's relief was obvious, and it confirmed Sarah's suspicions that something significant had been happening.
"My meeting ended early," Sarah said casually, though she was studying her daughter's face for signs of what she had been going through. "How was your week?" Emma hesitated, and Sarah could see the internal debate playing out in her expression. Her daughter had been raised to be honest, but she was also trying to be independent and handle her own problems. "It was fine," Emma said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah poured Emma a glass of orange juice and sat down across from her at the kitchen table. She had interrogated enemy combatants and extracted information from reluctant sources, but this was her daughter, and the situation required a completely different approach. "Emma," Sarah said gently, "I know something's been bothering you. I can see it in your face, and I heard it in your voice last night.
You don't have to handle everything alone, sweetheart. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help."
Emma looked at her mother and saw something in her expression that she couldn't quite identify. There was warmth and love, as always, but there was also something else, a kind of focused intensity that made Emma feel like her mother could see right through her. "There are some kids at school," Emma began slowly, "who have been bothering me." "What kind of bothering?" Sarah's voice remained calm, but Emma noticed that her mother's posture had changed almost imperceptibly. She was sitting straighter, more alert. Emma told her mother everything, about Jake and his friends, about the escalating harassment, about being followed home, about the incident in the library. As she spoke, Emma watched her mother's face, expecting to see anger or concern. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like professional assessment, as if her mother was analyzing a tactical situation. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah asked when Emma finished. "About 3 weeks.
"And they followed you home yesterday?"
"Yes. They know when you're away for work. They said they've been watching the house." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Emma could almost see her mind working. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried an undertone that Emma had never heard before. "Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You did nothing wrong by not telling me about this sooner, but this situation has escalated beyond normal bullying. These boys are engaging in stalking and intimidation, and that's a serious crime." "I didn't want to seem weak," Emma said quietly. Sarah reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. "Asking for help when you're facing a real threat isn't weakness, it's intelligence. I've known soldiers who died because they were too proud to call for backup when they needed it." Emma looked at her mother with surprise. Sarah rarely spoke about her military service in such specific terms. "What are we going to do?" Emma asked. "We're going to handle it," Sarah said simply. "But first, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Sarah spent the rest of the morning gathering information with the thoroughness of a military intelligence operation. She called the school and spoke with the principal, Emma's teachers, and the guidance counselor. She learned that Jake Morrison had been in trouble before for aggressive behavior, but his family's influence had kept him from facing serious consequences. She also learned something that made her blood boil. The school had received reports about the harassment of Emma, but had classified it as typical teenage drama and handled it with nothing more than a brief conversation with Jake about being nicer to his classmates. Sarah hung up the phone after speaking with the principal and sat quietly for several minutes. In her military career, she had faced enemies who were trying to kill her, but those enemies had been operating under rules of engagement and international law. This was different. These were predators targeting her daughter in a system that seemed designed to protect them rather than their victim. That afternoon, Sarah drove Emma to school. As they approached the building, Sarah's trained eyes automatically began conducting surveillance, noting sight lines, escape routes, and potential ambush points. It was habit from years of operating in hostile territory, but now she was applying those skills to her daughter's high school. "I'll pick you up right here at 3:15, Sarah told Emma. "If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately." Emma nodded and started to get out of the car, but Sarah caught her arm gently. "Emma, I need you to promise me something. If Jake or his friends approach you today, don't try to handle it alone. Find a teacher, go to the office, call me. Whatever you need to do to stay safe." This isn't about being strong or independent anymore. This is about recognizing a genuine threat. Emma looked into her mother's eyes and saw something that made her realize this situation was more serious than she had understood. There was a hardness in her mother's expression that Emma had never seen before, a look that spoke of experience with real danger. "I promise, Mom." Sarah watched Emma walk into the school, then positioned her car where she had a clear view of the entrances. She wasn't leaving anything to chance. Her phone was on the seat beside her, and she had already programmed in the numbers for the school office, the local police, and Emma's classroom. For the next 6 hours, Sarah Martinez was on high alert, in a way that she hadn't been since her last military deployment. Every instinct that had kept her alive in combat zones was now focused on protecting her daughter. Emma made it through most of the school day without incident. Jake and his friends were there, and they watched her with obvious interest, but they seemed to sense that something had changed. Perhaps it was Emma's posture, more confident now that she knew her mother was aware of the situation and taking it seriously. The confrontation came during the last period of the day. Emma was at her locker, gathering her books for homework, when Jake appeared beside her with Marcus and Tyler flanking him. The hallway was crowded with students rushing to catch buses, creating the perfect cover for intimidation. Well, Jake said quietly, positioning himself so that Emma couldn't easily move away from her locker. "Did you have a nice chat with Mummy?" Emma's heart started racing, but she remembered her mother's words about recognizing genuine threats. This felt dangerous in a way that made all her instincts scream for help. "I need to go," Emma said, trying to close her locker and move away. "We're not done talking," Jake said, and his hand shot out to slam Emma's locker shut, nearly catching her fingers. "You see, we heard you've been telling stories about us." "That's not very nice, scholarship girl." Emma realized that somehow they had found out she had spoken to her mother, possibly through contacts in the school administration. The thought that they had that kind of information network made the situation even more frightening. "You and your mommy think you can cause problems for us?" Marcus added, emboldened by Jake's aggression. "Do you have any idea who our families are? What we can do to people like you?" "We tried to be nice," Tyler said, though there had been nothing nice about any of their previous interactions. "We tried to help you understand your place, but you had to go crying to Mummy." Jake stepped closer, and Emma could smell his cologne mixed with something else, the scent of someone who enjoyed intimidating others.
"Here's what's going to happen, Navy brat."
"You're going to go home and tell your mother that you made it all up, that we were just kidding around and you misunderstood. Because if I don't, what?" Emma found herself saying, surprised by her own voice. Jake's smile turned cold. "Well, accidents happen, especially to girls who walk home alone. Especially when their mothers aren't around to protect them." The threat was clear and specific enough that Emma realized this had crossed every line her mother had taught her to recognize. This wasn't bullying anymore, this was a direct threat of physical harm. Emma looked around the hallway, but the crowd of students was thinning as people hurried to catch buses. The few adults she could see were busy with their own concerns. She was effectively alone with 3 boys who had just threatened to hurt her. Instead of panicking, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her. It was as if some part of her mother's training had transferred to her through genetics or years of observation. She looked Jake directly in the eyes and spoke with a steadiness that surprised even her. "You need to move away from me now," she said clearly. "And you need to stop threatening me." Jake laughed. "Or what? You'll tell your mommy again?" "I already did," Emma said, and pulled out her phone. What Jake and his friends didn't know was that Emma had been recording the conversation. Her mother had taught her to document threats, a lesson from Sarah's own experience with hostile interrogations and the importance of evidence. But more importantly, Emma pressed a button on her phone that activated an emergency app her mother had installed. It immediately sent Sarah her exact location, a recording of the conversation, and an alert that Emma was in danger. 3 miles away, Sarah Martinez was sitting in her car outside the school when her phone exploded with alerts. The emergency app showed Emma's location, played the recorded conversation, and indicated that Emma had activated the distress signal. Sarah heard Jake's threat about accidents happening to girls who walk home alone, and something inside her shifted into a mode that her former teammates would have recognized immediately. This was no longer a mother dealing with school bullying. This was a Navy SEAL whose family had been directly threatened. Sarah started her car and drove toward the school with the controlled urgency of someone moving to engage a hostile target.
Her mind was already working through tactical options, rules of engagement, and potential consequences. These boys had no idea what they had just triggered. Inside the school, Jake had realized that Emma was recording and had grabbed for her phone. In the struggle, Emma's books scattered across the floor, and she stumbled backward against her locker. The physical contact was the final escalation that Sarah's emergency app captured and transmitted. "Delete that recording," Jake hissed, still trying to get Emma's phone. "Delete it now or you'll be sorry. Get away from her." The voice came from behind Jake, and all four teenagers turned to see a woman walking down the hallway with a purposeful stride that commanded attention. At first glance, Sarah Martinez looked like any other concerned mother. Average height, athletic build, dressed in jeans and a sweater. But there was something in the way she moved that suggested she was far more dangerous than she appeared. Jake straightened up, probably expecting to intimidate another adult the way his family's influence had intimidated school administrators. He had no idea that he was facing someone who had killed enemy combatants with her bare hands and survived situations that would have broken most people. "Mrs. Martinez, I presume?" Jake said with a smirk, apparently thinking that social intimidation would work on Emma's mother the same way it worked on everyone else. Sarah stopped about 6 feet away from the group, positioning herself with the unconscious precision of someone trained in close-quarters combat. Her stance looked casual, but Emma noticed that her mother's weight was balanced and her hands were relaxed but ready. "You must be Jake Morrison," Sarah said calmly. "We need to talk." Jake Morrison had never encountered anyone like Sarah Martinez, though he didn't realize it yet. He was accustomed to adults who were either intimidated by his family's wealth and influence, or who tried to handle conflicts with teenage boys through reasoning and compromise. He expected Emma's mother to be just another obstacle that could be managed with the right combination of charm and subtle threats. "Mrs. Martinez," Jake said with practiced confidence, "I think there's been some misunderstanding. We were just talking to Emma about a school project." Sarah looked at her daughter, taking in Emma's scattered books, her defensive posture, and the way the three boys were positioned to trap her against the lockers. Then she looked back at Jake, with the kind of calm assessment that preceded action in combat situations. "Emma, go wait in the main office," Sarah said without taking her eyes off Jake. "Tell them your mother is handling a security situation and will be there shortly." "Mum, Now, Emma." Emma gathered her books quickly and walked away, though she kept looking back with concern. She had never seen her mother like this, completely calm but radiating a kind of controlled danger that made the air feel electric. Once Emma was gone, Sarah's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. The concerned mother was still there, but underneath was something that Jake's subconscious recognized as genuinely threatening, even though his conscious mind hadn't caught up yet. "Now," Sarah said quietly, "let's discuss your behavior toward my daughter." Jake glanced at his friends, drawing confidence from their presence. In his experience, 3 teenage boys could intimidate any adult, especially a woman. "Martinez, I don't know what Emma told you, but I heard exactly what you said to her." Sarah interrupted. "Something about accidents happening to girls who walk home alone. Something about her mother not being around to protect her." Jake's confident expression faltered slightly. He hadn't realized Emma was recording, and he certainly hadn't expected her mother to hear his threats so quickly. We were just joking around. You know how kids talk." Sarah stepped closer, and Jake noticed that she moved with a fluid precision that seemed unusual. Most adults moved with the casual coordination of people who had never faced real physical danger. But this woman moved like someone who had been trained for violence. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm but taking on an edge that made Marcus and Tyler unconsciously step backward, "I've spent time in places where people make threats they intend to keep. I know the difference between joking and promising violence. Which one were you doing?" Jake felt the first real stirring of unease. There was something in Sarah Martinez's eyes that he had never seen in any adult before. A complete lack of fear, and what looked almost like predatory assessment. "I think you're overreacting," Jake said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Maybe we should get the principal involved." "The principal?" Sarah smiled. And it wasn't a warm expression. "The same principal who classified stalking and threats of violence as typical teenage drama? I don't think so." Sarah pulled out her phone and played the recording Emma had made. Jake's voice filled the hallway, crystal clear and undeniably threatening. "Accidents happen, especially to girls who walk home alone, especially when their mothers aren't around to protect them. Now," Sarah said, putting her phone away. "You're going to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Jake started to object, but Sarah held up one hand, and something in the gesture made him stop talking immediately. It wasn't a casual, wait-a-minute gesture. It was the kind of command signal used to stop movement in tactical situations. "You and your friends have been engaging in criminal stalking, harassment, and intimidation. You've threatened my daughter with physical violence. You've conducted surveillance of my home. Any one of these actions would be enough to have you arrested and charged as an adult. You can't prove," Marcus started to say. Sarah turned to look at him, and he stopped talking mid-sentence. Her gaze had the kind of focus that made people realize they were being evaluated as a potential threat. "I have recordings, screenshots, witness statements, and documentation going back 3 weeks," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "I also have security camera footage of you following my daughter home and conducting surveillance of my property." This was partially a bluff. Sarah had been out of town and hadn't had time to install comprehensive security systems yet, but her delivery was so confident and professional that the boys believed her completely. "But here's what concerns me most," Sarah continued, "is the escalation pattern. You started with name-calling, progressed to stalking, then to direct threats of violence. In my experience, people who follow that pattern are usually working up to acting on their threats." Jake was beginning to realize that this conversation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Sarah Martinez wasn't trying to scold him or reason with him the way other adults did. She was speaking to him as if he were an enemy combatant, and her calm professionalism was far more frightening than anger would have been. "So here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, and her voice took on the kind of authority that came from years of giving orders in life-or-death situations. "You're going to stop all contact with my daughter. You're going to delete her phone number, remove her from your social media, and pretend she doesn't exist. If you see her in the hallway, you're going to look the other way. And if we don't," Jake said, trying to regain some of his lost bravado. Sarah studied him for a long moment, and Jake had the uncomfortable feeling that she was deciding something important about his future. "Morrison, let me tell you about my background," Sarah said conversationally. "I'm a former Navy SEAL. I've spent years in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, dealing with people who were actively trying to kill me and my teammates. I've been trained in hand-to-hand combat, weapon systems, surveillance, intelligence gathering, and what the military calls neutralizing threats to mission-critical personnel." Jake's face went pale as the implications of what she was saying sank in. "Now, my daughter is my mission-critical personnel," Sarah continued, "and you've identified yourself as a threat to her safety. So I need you to understand something very clearly. I have skills and experience that you cannot imagine, and I will use every single one of them to protect my daughter." Marcus and Tyler were backing away slowly, finally understanding that this situation was far beyond anything they had prepared for. But Jake, either through stubbornness or failure to fully grasp what he was dealing with, tried one more approach. "You're threatening minors," he said. "That's illegal. My father is a lawyer and—" "I'm not threatening anyone," Sarah said calmly. "I'm explaining consequences. If you continue to threaten my daughter, I will have you arrested for stalking, harassment, and making terroristic threats. If you approach my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing. If you make any attempt to harm my daughter, I will defend her using whatever level of force is necessary to neutralize the threat." Sarah paused and looked directly into Jake's eyes. "And, Mr. Joe Morrison, I want you to understand something about the difference between your father's legal training and my military training. Your father learned to fight with words and paperwork. I learned to fight with everything else." Jake realized that his usual tactics, intimidation, family influence, social pressure, were completely useless against someone who had faced actual enemies in actual combat. Sarah Martinez wasn't impressed by his wealth or his connections or his ability to make other people afraid. She had dealt with people who were far more dangerous than he could ever be. "Do we understand each other?" Sarah asked. Jake nodded, finally understanding that he was completely outmatched. "I need to hear you say it," Sarah said. We understand," Jake mumbled. "Good. Now I want you to take out your phone and delete Emma's number while I watch." Jake hesitated, and Sarah simply waited with the patience of someone who had conducted much more serious interrogations. After a moment, Jake pulled out his phone and deleted Emma's contact information. "Social media too," Sarah said. Jake and his friends removed Emma from their social media accounts while Sarah watched. "Excellent," Sarah said. "Now, I'm going to give you some advice that could save your life. There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who make threats they can't back up, and those who don't make threats at all because they don't need to.
I'm the second kind.
Sarah stepped closer to Jake, and he found himself backing against the lockers. If I ever hear that you've contacted my daughter, approached her, looked at her wrong, or made her feel unsafe in any way, you're going to discover exactly what I learned during 8 years of military training.
And I promise you, Mr. Morrison, that's not an experience you want to have.
Jake nodded frantically, finally understanding that he had stumbled into something far more serious than typical adult intervention in teenage problems. One more thing, Sarah said.
If you or your friends retaliate against Emma for today's conversation, if you spread rumors about her, if you make her life difficult in any way, I will consider that a continuation of your threat pattern, and I will respond accordingly. Sarah looked at Marcus and Tyler, who were pressed against the opposite wall, looking terrified. That goes for all of you. Emma Martinez is now off limits to you permanently. If I were you, I would transfer to another school district, because the alternative is spending the next 2 years being very, very careful not to cross someone who has killed enemy combatants in defense of American interests. The three boys stood frozen as Sarah walked away, heading toward the main office where Emma was waiting. None of them spoke for several minutes after she was gone. Finally, Marcus whispered, "Jake, what the hell did we just get ourselves into?" Jake was still pressed against the lockers, his mind reeling as he tried to process what had just happened. He had always assumed that his wealth and family connections made him essentially untouchable, at least when it came to dealing with people like Emma and her mother. He had never encountered someone who operated completely outside the social systems that usually protected him. "Did she just say she was a Navy SEAL?" Tyler asked quietly. "Yeah," Jake said, his voice shaky. "Yeah, I think she did." In the main office, Emma was sitting in a chair, trying to process what she had just witnessed. She had never seen her mother in action before, had never understood exactly what Sarah's military background meant in practical terms. Now she was beginning to realize that her quiet, loving mother was someone who had lived through experiences that Emma couldn't even imagine. When Sarah entered the office, Emma looked at her with new eyes. Her mother looked exactly the same as always, but Emma now understood that there were depths to Sarah Martinez that she had never fully appreciated. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, sitting down beside Emma. "I think so," Emma said. "Mum, what did you say to them?" "I explained some consequences," Sarah said simply. "And I made it clear that threatening my daughter was a mistake they wouldn't want to repeat." Emma looked at her mother with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "You really were a Navy SEAL, weren't you?" Sarah smiled, and it was the warm, familiar smile that Emma remembered from childhood. "I was. But more importantly, I'm your mother, and protecting you is the most important mission I've ever had." Over the next few weeks, the transformation at Emma's school was remarkable. Jake Morrison and his friends didn't just avoid Emma, they seemed to go out of their way to avoid even being in the same parts of the building as her. When they did encounter her by chance, they looked terrified and quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. Word of the confrontation spread through the school, though the details became increasingly exaggerated with each retelling. Some students claimed that Emma's mother was a Special Forces operative, others said she was a CIA agent, and a few insisted she was a former assassin. Emma never corrected these rumors. She found that having a mysterious and possibly dangerous mother was an excellent deterrent to future bullying. More importantly, other students who had been targets of Jake and his friends found that the harassment stopped completely. Jake seemed to have lost all interest in intimidating anyone, apparently having discovered that some people had parents who were willing and able to escalate conflicts beyond anything he was prepared to handle. Emma's grades improved dramatically as she no longer had to worry about being stalked through the hallways or threatened in the library. She made new friends, joined the debate team, and began to flourish in ways that hadn't been possible when she was constantly looking over her shoulder. Sarah, meanwhile, installed a proper security system at their house and made some discreet inquiries about the Morrison family. What she learned confirmed her assessment that Jake had been on a dangerous path. His pattern of escalating aggression, combined with family wealth that had always protected him from consequences, suggested that someone needed to teach him about boundaries before he hurt someone seriously. 3 months later, Emma came home from school with news that Jake Morrison was transferring to a private military academy in another state. Apparently, his parents had decided that he needed more structure and discipline in his life. "Think it will help him?" Emma asked her mother. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Maybe. Some people need to learn that actions have consequences and that there are always people in the world who are stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than they are. With luck,
He'll learn those lessons before he gets himself into real trouble.
Emma looked at her mother with the deep respect that comes from seeing someone you love handle a crisis with perfect competence and control. Mom, can you teach me some of the things you learned in the military? Sarah smiled. Which things? How to be brave when people try to scare you. How to stay calm when things get dangerous. How to protect people you care about. Those are good things to learn, Sarah said. But the most important lesson is knowing when to ask for help. You don't have to face every battle alone, Emma. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is call for backup when you need it. Emma hugged her mother, understanding for the first time the full weight of what Sarah had given up to raise her. Sarah Martinez had been one of the military's elite warriors, someone trained for the most dangerous missions imaginable, and she had walked away from that life to be a single mother in a small town. I love you, Mum, Emma said. I love you too, sweetheart, and I will always be here to protect you, no matter what. That night, as Emma did her homework without fear for the first time in months, Sarah sat in her study, looking at the photographs from her military service. She had thought those days were behind her, that the skills she had learned would never be needed again. She had been wrong, and she was grateful for that. Every lesson learned in dangerous places, every skill acquired through brutal training, every instinct honed by years of survival in hostile environments, all of it had served a purpose she never could have imagined when she was serving overseas. She had become a Navy SEAL to protect her country and her teammates. In the end, the most important mission had been protecting her daughter. Jake Morrison never bothered Emma again. In fact, he never bothered anyone again. The military academy helped him understand discipline and respect in ways his wealthy family never had, and he eventually became a decent young man who was grateful that Sarah Martinez had taught him about consequences before he faced someone less patient and more violent. Emma Martinez grew up to become a strong, confident woman who understood both the importance of asking for help when you need it and the value of being someone others can turn to when they need protection. She never became a Navy SEAL like her mother, but she carried the lessons Sarah had taught her about courage, strength, and the responsibility that comes with both. And Sarah Martinez continued to be a mother first and a warrior second, though she never again forgot that sometimes the two roles require exactly the same skills.